Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. Listen up, folks. Name's Chuck. I'm 74, and I've been sitting in my bar for the past 24 hours watching the world go to hell through boarded-up windows. O'Malley's Pub has been my life since '81, and I'll be damned if I'm leaving it now. The headache hit me first when I woke up this morning. Not from the bottle of Jameson I'd killed the night before, though that didn't help, but from the sound. Constant scraping, like fingernails on concrete but duller, wetter. The kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. I rolled off the leather booth where I'd passed out, my bad hip screaming as I hit the floor. The cane clattered beside me, and for a moment everything was quiet except for that damn jukebox. Sinatra's My Way was skipping on the same line. And now the end is near, and now the end is near, and now... The needle was stuck, scratching the same groove over and over. The smell hit me next, sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun, seeping through the cracks around the front door. I'd smelled death before. Vietnam taught me that. But this was different, thicker, like it was alive. My hands shook as I reached for the shotgun propped against the bar. The Remington 870 felt heavier than it should have, and I had to grip it tight to stop the trembling. 24 hours. Had it really only been 24 hours since I'd barricaded myself in here? The memory of Tommy's face flashed through my mind, and I had to lean against the bar to steady myself. Tommy Kowalski, who'd been coming to O'Malley's every Friday for 15 years, always ordered the same thing, Budweiser and a shot of wild turkey, always complained about his ex-wife, always left a $5 tip on a $12 tab. Yesterday morning, Tommy had been pounding on my door, screaming about his neighbor. Chuck, you gotta help me. Mrs. Patterson, Jesus Christ, Chuck, she bit me." His voice was raw, desperate. I'd seen the blood on his forearm through the glass, deep puncture marks that looked infected already. I should have let him in. Should have cleaned his wounds, called an ambulance. Instead, I watched through the window as 3 more of those things came shambling around the corner. They moved wrong, like marionettes with half their strings cut. Legs dragging, arms swinging loose. Heads tilted at angles that made my spine crawl. Tommy saw them too. He turned to run, but he was already weak from blood loss. They caught him 10 feet from my door. The sound he made? It wasn't screaming. It was worse. It was the sound of a man realizing he was about to become something else entirely. I'd slammed the bolt home and started stacking chairs against the door. Now, a full day later, I could still hear them out there. Shuffling feet, occasional thumps against the walls. Sometimes a low moan that might have once been human. The windows were covered with whatever furniture I could move. Tables, chairs, even the old piano from the corner stage. But I could see through the gaps. Shadows moved past constantly. Bent figures dragging themselves down what used to be Maple Street. Some still wore the clothes they'd died in. Business suits, hospital scrubs, a little girl's pink dress that made my stomach turn. But they weren't people anymore. Whatever spark had made them human was gone, replaced by something basic and hungry. I limped to the bar and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. The bottleneck rattled against the glass. My hands weren't getting any steadier. The water was still running, thank God. I'd filled every container I could find. Beer mugs, mixing bowls, even the mop bucket. The electricity flickered on and off, but mostly off. The refrigerator had stopped humming hours ago, and I could smell the beer going bad in the coolers. Food was another problem. O'Malley's wasn't exactly a restaurant. I had peanuts, pretzels, some stale sandwiches from yesterday's lunch crowd. Maybe enough for 3 days if I was careful. The whiskey would last longer, but that was a different kind of sustenance. A sudden crash made me jump, sloshing whiskey down my shirt. Something heavy had hit the window behind the bar. I grabbed the shotgun and crept closer, pressing my ear to the plywood I'd nailed over the glass. Breathing. Wet, labored breathing just inches from my head, then scratching like it was trying to claw through the wood. the sound of fingernails, or what used to be fingernails, scraping against the barrier. "Go away," I whispered, then felt stupid for talking to something that couldn't understand words anymore. The scratching continued, patient, mindless. It didn't get frustrated or give up, it just kept at it, wearing away at the wood grain by grain. I backed away from the window and nearly tripped over a bar stool. The movement sent a bolt of pain through my hip, and I had to bite back a curse. At my age, every fall could be the last one. Every injury could be what finally slowed me down enough for those things to catch up. The jukebox finally gave up, Sinatra's voice cutting off mid-word. The silence was somehow worse than the repetitive music. Now I could hear everything, the shuffle of feet on broken glass outside, the creak of the building settling, my own ragged breathing. I thought about Eddie then, Eddie Kowalski, Tommy's older brother, though they'd never gotten along. Eddie had been my beer delivery guy for 20 years, every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork. Big guy, arms like tree trunks from hauling cases all day. If anyone could have survived this mess, it should have been Eddie. But I'd seen him too, in those first chaotic hours. Seen him stumbling down the alley behind the bar, half his face missing, that familiar blue delivery shirt torn and soaked in blood. He'd walked right past the back door and I'd held my breath until he disappeared around the corner. The worst part was how normal he'd looked from behind. Same slumped shoulders, same work boots, same bald spot on the back of his head. For a second, I'd almost called out to him. Almost. I finished the whiskey and poured another, then another. The bottle was getting light and I'd need to pace myself. How long could this last? Days? Weeks? Surely someone would come. The National Guard, FEMA, somebody with guns and authority and a plan to clean up this mess. But deep down, I knew better. I'd lived through enough disasters to recognize when the system was broken beyond repair. This wasn't a hurricane or a blackout. This was something that fed on people, that turned them into more of itself. An infection that spread through the one thing humans couldn't avoid: contact with each other. The smart ones had run, packed up their cars and headed for the hills, putting distance between themselves and the cities where it started. The rest of us were stuck. As darkness began to fall, I could hear more of them gathering outside. Their footsteps were becoming a constant background noise like rain on the roof. Except rain didn't moan. Rain didn't scratch at windows with broken fingers. I checked the shotgun's chamber again. 4 shells loaded, 6 more in my pocket, 10 shots total. After that, I had a Louisville Slugger from behind the bar and a kitchen knife I'd sharpened that morning. Not much against a crowd, but maybe enough to make my exit on my own terms. The whiskey was making me maudlin. I started talking to the photographs on the wall, regular customers who'd become friends over the years. My late wife Margaret smiling from our wedding day, even the old St. Patrick's Day group shot from '95, when half the neighborhood had crammed into O'Malley's for the celebration. "Hell of a party that was, Maggie," I said to her picture. "Remember how Riley threw up in the corner booth? And Mrs. Jin tried to do that Irish jig, broke her ankle right in front of the dartboard?" The photo didn't answer, but I could almost hear her laugh. Margaret had loved the bar as much as I did, even when it kept me working till all hours. She'd understood that O'Malley's wasn't just a business, it was a community. A place where people came to forget their troubles, celebrate their victories, and feel less alone in the world. Now it was just a tomb with better lighting. A new sound cut through my thoughts, breaking glass. Not from outside, but from somewhere in the building. The basement, maybe, or the storage room. My blood turned to ice as I realized what it meant. They'd found another way in. The sound came again, definitely breaking glass, somewhere below me. The basement. Christ, I'd forgotten about the cellar windows. Small ones, ground level, probably hidden by weeds and garbage cans. Perfect size for something to squeeze through if it was determined enough. I grabbed the shotgun and hobbled toward the basement door, each step sending shockwaves through my arthritic knee. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended, the darkness swallowing me whole. My free hand felt along the wall for the light switch, but nothing happened when I flipped it. The power was completely gone now. The basement smelled like stale beer and mold, familiar scents from 40 years of running this place. But underneath was something else, that sweet rot smell, stronger now. Coming from the far corner where I kept the extra kegs. I stood perfectly still, listening, breathing that wasn't mine, shallow and wet. Then the scrape of something moving across concrete. My hands tightened on the shotgun as a pale shape emerged from behind the beer kegs. It had been a woman once, middle-aged, wearing what looked like a nurse's uniform, though it was hard to tell through all the blood and filth. Her left arm hung at an impossible angle, clearly broken, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were clouded, vacant, but fixed on me with laser focus. Hunger, pure, mindless hunger. She took a step forward, then another. Her broken arm swayed with each movement, and I could hear the bones grinding together. The sound made my stomach lurch, but I forced myself to raise the gun. "Stay back," I said, knowing it was useless. These things didn't understand words anymore. They understood motion, heat, the smell of living flesh. Nothing else. She lunged at me with surprising speed, mouth open wide enough to show blackened teeth. I pulled the trigger. The blast in the confined space was deafening. The thing that had been a nurse slammed backward into the kegs, dark fluid spattering the wall behind her. She didn't get up. My ears were ringing so loud I almost missed the sound of more glass breaking upstairs. Multiple windows this time. They were coming in through the front. I climbed the stairs as fast as my old legs would carry me, which wasn't fast enough. By the time I reached the main floor, they were already inside. 3 of them, maybe 4, stumbling over the furniture I'd piled against the windows. The plywood had given way under sustained pressure, and now jagged pieces of wood and glass littered the floor. The first one through was wearing a postal uniform. His face was mostly gone. Something had taken a massive bite out of his left cheek, exposing yellowed teeth and black gums. He turned toward me and started walking, arms reaching out like he was trying to embrace a long-lost friend. Behind him came what might have been a teenager, hard to tell with half the scalp peeled back. Still wearing a Letterman jacket from the local high school, the school Rita's grandson had attended before all this. Rita. Jesus, I hadn't let myself think about Rita since yesterday. She'd worked the evening shift at O'Malley's for 15 years, ever since her husband died. Best waitress I'd ever had, could remember orders without writing them down, knew every regular's drink before they asked, had a smile that could calm down even the angriest drunk. When the chaos started, she'd been visiting her daughter across town. I'd tried calling her cell phone a dozen times that first night, but all I got was busy signals or that electronic screech that meant the towers were down. I kept telling myself she'd gotten out, that she was somewhere safe with her family. But I knew better. Rita wouldn't have left without making sure all her regulars were okay. She'd have tried to come back to the bar, tried to help people. That's who she was. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Rita 3 weeks ago, showing me pictures of her grandson's football game. "He's got a full scholarship to state, Chuck. Can you believe it? First person in our family to go to college." The kid in the Letterman jacket took another step toward me, and I could see the state university logo on his sleeve. Same colors, same design. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely aim the shotgun. The postal worker was close enough now that I could smell him. Decay and something chemical, like bleach mixed with rotting meat. I pulled the trigger and watched him crumple. The teenager, Rita's grandson it had to be, kept coming. No recognition in those dead eyes, no trace of the boy who'd scored the winning touchdown just a month ago. I raised the gun again, but my vision was blurring. Tears, whiskey, or both. "I'm sorry, Rita," I whispered and pulled the trigger. The third one got tangled up in the overturned furniture, giving me time to retreat behind the bar. My ammunition was running low, only 1 shell left in the gun, 5 in my pocket, and there were more coming through the broken windows. The jukebox suddenly roared to life, some final electrical surge bringing Sinatra back from the dead. I did it my way, blasted through the chaos, drowning out the moans and shuffling footsteps. The irony wasn't lost on me. I reloaded the shotgun with shaking hands, spilling shells on the floor behind the bar. One of the creatures had made it over the furniture barrier and was stumbling toward me, dragging a broken leg behind it. Female, maybe 30, wearing a wedding dress that was more red than white now. The bride reached the bar and started climbing over it, her movements clumsy but determined. I could see the wedding ring still on her finger, a small diamond that caught the last fading light from outside. Somewhere a groom was probably looking for her, or maybe he'd already found her, in the worst possible way. I put the gun barrel against her forehead and fired. The ring fell to the floor and rolled under the ice machine. 4 shells left. 2 more creatures struggling through the window wreckage. I did the math and didn't like the answer. The next few minutes were a blur of gunshots and desperate scrambling. I managed to put down the 2 by the window, but the sound had attracted more from outside. I could see shapes pressed against the remaining plywood, hear the wood beginning to splinter under the weight of multiple bodies. By the time quiet returned, I was down to my last shell and covered in things I didn't want to think about. The bar looked like a war zone. Overturned stools, broken glass everywhere, dark stains spreading across the hardwood floor I'd installed myself back in '85. I grabbed a bottle of bourbon and collapsed into a booth, my whole body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. The jukebox had finally died again, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the occasional thump from outside. The wedding ring was still visible under the ice machine, catching stray light from somewhere. I thought about crawling over to get it, maybe putting it somewhere respectful. But what was the point? Respect was for the living, and there weren't many of us left. I drank straight from the bottle, not bothering with a glass. The bourbon burned, but it helped steady my hands. Outside, full darkness had fallen and the sounds were getting worse. More of them gathering, drawn by the gunshots or just the general scent of life coming from the building. Tomorrow would bring new problems. Food was running low, ammunition even lower. The barriers were compromised, and I was too old and drunk to fix them properly. But tomorrow felt like a luxury I might not live to see. I raised the bottle in a toast to the empty bar. To Rita, I said aloud. To Tommy and Eddie, to all the good people who deserved better than this. The bourbon was making me dizzy, or maybe it was blood loss from cuts I hadn't noticed. Either way, the booth felt comfortable, almost soft. I closed my eyes for just a moment, the bottle slipping from my fingers. When I opened them again, dawn light was seeping through the cracks in the plywood, and the nightmare was about to begin all over again. The hangover hit me like a freight train. My mouth tasted like something had crawled inside and died, which wasn't far from the truth considering what I'd been breathing all night. Every muscle in my body ached, and when I tried to sit up, the world spun sideways. The bottle had shattered when it fell, leaving a puddle of bourbon mixed with God knows what else on the booth's vinyl seat. Glass fragments caught the morning light, creating tiny rainbows in the mess, beautiful in a sick way. I forced myself to stand, using the table for support. The bar looked even worse in daylight. Bodies sprawled across the floor, dark pools congealing between the floorboards. The smell was overwhelming now, copper and decay and something sweet that made my stomach churn. The postal worker's uniform was still visible beneath the overturned stool where he'd fallen. I could see his name tag, Wilson. Probably had a wife, kids, mortgage payments. Now he was just meat rotting on my floor. I stepped over the bride's body, careful not to look at her face. Her wedding dress was expensive, real silk, intricate beadwork around the neckline. Someone had saved for months to buy that dress. Someone had dreamed of their perfect day, planned every detail, sent out invitations with little hearts in the corners. The ring was still under the ice machine. I got down on my hands and knees, ignoring the pain in my hip, and fished it out. The band was white gold, the diamond maybe half a carat. Modest but beautiful. I slipped it into my shirt pocket. Outside, the sounds had changed. Less random wandering, more purposeful movement. They were learning the layout of the neighborhood, following familiar paths, the mailman's route, the school bus stops, the way to O'Malley's. I limped to the broken window and peered through a gap in the plywood. The street was full of them now. Dozens, maybe more. They clustered around the overturned cars, sniffing at the abandoned vehicles like dogs trying to catch a scent. Some still wore their work uniforms: fast food workers, bank tellers, construction crews. The whole workforce of a small town, transformed into something else entirely. A group of them had gathered around Mrs. Patterson's house across the street. The front door was hanging open, and I could see dark stains on the white porch steps. They kept going in and coming back out, like they were searching for something, or someone. Mrs. Patterson had been Tommy's neighbor, the one who'd bitten him. 83 years old, made the best apple pie in 3 counties. She'd given me a slice just last week, along with her usual lecture about drinking too much and not taking care of myself. "You need a good woman to look after you, Chuck," she'd said, same as always. "Margaret wouldn't want you wasting away in that bar." Now she was probably one of the things wandering through her own house, tracking blood across the hardwood floors she'd polished every Saturday for 40 years. I moved away from the window and surveyed my supplies. The food situation was worse than I'd thought. Most of the nuts were scattered across the floor, contaminated with debris from the fight. I had maybe 2 cans of mixed nuts left, a bag of stale pretzels, and half a sandwich that was already growing fuzzy around the edges. The water was holding up better. I'd managed to fill 8 containers before the pressure dropped, enough for maybe a week if I was careful. The whiskey would last longer, but I couldn't live on alcohol alone. Well, I could try, but it wouldn't end well. I checked the ammunition again. 1 shell in the gun, that was it, against what looked like half the town shambling around outside. The basement access was completely compromised. The cellar window was just a jagged hole now, and I could hear movement down there. Slow, shuffling steps across the concrete floor. At least one of them had gotten in before I dealt with the nurse, maybe more. I thought about going down to check, but what was the point? I couldn't clear them out with 4 shells, and I couldn't block the window without exposing myself to whatever was already down there. Better to stay upstairs and hope they couldn't figure out how to climb stairs. The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. I tried to read newspapers left behind by customers, but I couldn't focus. Everything seemed trivial now: sports scores, celebrity gossip, political arguments that didn't matter when half the voters were dead. Rita had always loved the gossip magazines. She'd read them during slow periods, shaking her head at Hollywood scandals. "These people have everything," she'd say, "and they still find ways to mess it up." Rita had never messed anything up. She'd raised 3 kids as a single mother after her husband died in a factory accident, worked 2 jobs, never missed a day, never complained. When her oldest got into trouble with drugs, she'd driven to the city every weekend to visit him in rehab. The baby who'd grown up to be the football star whose brains I'd blown out last night. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, recognizing the Letterman jacket, realizing who I was pointing the gun at. But there hadn't been a choice. The thing wearing her grandson's face wasn't him anymore. The guilt was eating at me worse than hunger. I opened another bottle, cheap vodka that burned going down, and tried to drown it out. But alcohol only made the memories sharper, more vivid. He's going to make something of himself, Chuck. He's going to be somebody. Now he was nobody. Just another body on my floor. As evening approached, the sounds outside intensified. The infected seemed more active at night, maybe because the cooler air carried scents better. I barricaded the broken window as best I could, using furniture and duct tape. It wouldn't stop them if they really wanted in, but it might slow them down. The jukebox had enough power for 1 more song. I fed it a quarter and selected B7, "The Way You Look Tonight," Margaret's favorite. "Promise me something," she'd whispered on our wedding night. "Promise me we'll always find reasons to dance." I'd kept that promise for 37 years, until the cancer took her voice away. The song ended and silence returned. No more quarters. No more music. Just the distant sounds of a world ending. The vodka burned, but it kept the memories warm. In a world gone cold and hungry, warmth was worth more than tomorrow. I woke up on the floor again, this time with my face pressed against something sticky. Blood, probably mine from where I'd cut myself on broken glass during the night. My left temple throbbed, and when I touched it, my fingers came away red. 48 hours. That's how long it had been since the world ended, since Tommy died outside my door, since I'd made the choice to stay instead of run. The bar was a tomb now, filled with bodies that had once been people. Wilson the mailman lay crumpled near the overturned table, his postal bag still slung across his shoulder. The bride in her ruined dress sprawled behind the bar, one pale hand reaching toward nothing. Rita's grandson, or what had been Rita's grandson, was face down by the window, his Letterman jacket soaked through with dark stains. I pulled myself up using a bar stool, every joint screaming in protest. The silence outside was different now. Not the bustling quiet of a small town going about its business, but the hollow emptiness of a place where all the living had either fled or joined the ranks of the hungry dead. Through the gaps in my makeshift barricades, I could see the street. More of them had gathered overnight, dozens shambling aimlessly between the abandoned cars and overturned trash cans. A woman in scrubs dragged herself along the sidewalk, her legs clearly broken, but still carrying her forward. A man in a business suit wandered in slow circles, his briefcase still clutched in one decomposing hand. They were patient, these creatures. That's what made them so dangerous. They didn't get tired, didn't get bored, didn't give up and go home. They just waited, drawn by the faint scent of living flesh, ready to swarm the moment you made a mistake. I checked my supplies one more time. The shotgun held one shell, my last. The water was down to maybe 2 days' worth if I rationed carefully. Food was practically gone. Some stale crackers, a can of peanuts with a dented lid, and half a bottle of hot sauce that wouldn't do much good on its own. The whiskey, though. I still had plenty of whiskey. I opened a bottle of Jameson, the good stuff I'd been saving for special occasions. What occasion could be more special than the end of everything? The first sip burned, but it was a familiar burn, like an old friend's handshake. "Well, Maggie," I said to her photograph on the wall, "looks like I won't be keeping the bar open much longer." Margaret smiled back at me from behind the glass, frozen in time at our wedding. She was wearing the blue dress that brought out her eyes, the one she'd worn every anniversary until it finally fell apart. I'd offered to buy her a new one, but she'd said nothing could replace that dress. Too many memories sewn into the fabric. I understood that feeling now. The afternoon sun slanted through the cracks in my barricades, painting golden stripes across the blood-stained floor. Dust motes danced in the light, indifferent to the carnage below. Beautiful, in a way. Margaret would have appreciated the irony, beauty persisting even in the middle of hell. A memory surfaced unbidden. Margaret and I dancing to that same Sinatra song on our 10th anniversary. The bar had been closed for a private party, just the two of us, a bottle of champagne, and the jukebox playing our favorites. She'd laughed when I tried to dip her, nearly dropping her because my back wasn't what it used to be. "You're getting old, Chuck," she'd teased. "Getting old beats the alternative," I'd replied. Now I wasn't so sure about that. I took another drink and studied the photograph more closely. Margaret at 25, full of life and dreams. She'd wanted children back then, used to talk about converting the apartment above the bar into a nursery. But it never happened. Maybe it was for the best. At least we never had to watch our kids turn into monsters. The basement had gone quiet. Either the infected down there had found their way out through the broken window, or they'd simply stopped moving. It didn't matter much either way. I wasn't going down to check. A new sound drifted in from outside. Helicopters, distant but getting closer. For a moment my heart jumped. Rescue? Military evacuation? But as the sound grew louder, I realized it was wrong. Too irregular, too strained. The whine of engines pushed beyond their limits. Through a gap in the plywood, I watched 2 helicopters pass overhead, flying low and fast. One was trailing smoke from its tail rotor. They disappeared toward the north, in the direction of the interstate. Probably heading for one of those quarantine zones I'd heard about on the radio before the broadcast stopped. Good luck to them. By now, those zones were probably overrun too. Evening came early, shadows creeping across the bar like slow fingers. I lit a candle, one of the emergency ones Margaret had insisted we keep behind the bar. The flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The photographs seemed to come alive in the candlelight. Regular customers from over the years, their faces warm and familiar. Bob Henderson, who'd celebrated every birthday here until the heart attack took him 2 years ago. Jenny Walsh, who'd announced her engagement at that very table by the window. The Sullivan brothers, who'd spent every St. Patrick's Day here until the younger one moved to Florida. All gone now, one way or another. I raised the bottle in another toast. To all of you, I said aloud. To everyone who made O'Malley's more than just a bar. The whiskey was making everything soft around the edges, blurring the line between memory and reality. I could almost hear the conversations, the laughter, the clink of glasses. Almost see Margaret behind the bar, polishing glasses with that little smile she got when she was content. You should have evacuated, I told her picture. Should have grabbed a bag and headed for the hills like everyone else. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. I'd stayed because this was where I belonged. O'Malley's wasn't just my business, it was my life, my legacy, my cathedral. These walls held 40 years of memories, and I'd be damned if I was going to abandon them now. The candle burned lower. Outside, the sounds were changing again. More deliberate movement, like the infected were gathering for something. Maybe they could sense that time was running out. Maybe they were just drawn by the faint light seeping through my barricades. I finished the Jameson and reached for another bottle. This one was older, a gift from a customer who'd appreciated the way I'd listened to his troubles without judgment. Single malt, aged 21 years. Older than some of the infected stumbling around out there. The first sip was smooth as silk. This was dying whiskey, the kind you saved for special moments. And what moment could be more special than your last? I walked to the jukebox and felt around in my pocket for quarters. Empty. But the machine had a manual override, a little switch behind the coin slot that Margaret had shown me years ago. For emergencies, she'd said. For when the music needed to play no matter what. This qualified as an emergency. The jukebox hummed to life, mechanical components clicking into place. I selected our song, B7, The Way You Look Tonight. Sinatra's voice filled the empty bar, smooth and confident, singing about love that transcended time. I closed my eyes and swayed slightly, remembering how it felt to hold Margaret in my arms. The weight of her, the warmth, the way she fit perfectly against my chest. For a moment I could almost feel her there. The song ended, but I hit the button again, and again. Let Sinatra sing about eternal love while the world burned down around us. Let the music play until the power finally died. I settled into my usual spot at the end of the bar, the place where I'd held court for 4 decades. The good scotch was making me philosophical, the way it always did. I thought about choices, about the roads taken and not taken, about the moment 3 days ago when the first reports came in and I'd decided to stay instead of run. No regrets. That was important. A man ought to be able to face his end without regrets. I opened the gun case behind the bar and took out my final surprise. A Cuban cigar I'd been saving for 20 years. Romeo y Julieta, still wrapped in its cellophane. Margaret had bought it for me the day we'd finally paid off the mortgage on the bar. For when you're ready to celebrate, she'd said. I was ready now. The cigar was still perfect, the wrapper smooth and oily. I cut the tip with the knife I kept for slicing lemons, then lit it with Margaret's Zippo, the one with our initials engraved on the side. The first draw was heaven, rich, complex, with hints of leather and cedar and something indefinably sweet. This was how tobacco was supposed to taste when it was treated with respect, aged with patience, crafted with love. I smoked slowly, savoring each puff. Outside, the scratching at the windows had intensified. They knew I was in here, could probably smell the smoke, the whiskey, the scent of living flesh. But they could wait. They'd waited this long. Halfway through the cigar, I made my decision about how this would end. I walked to the storage room and found what I was looking for, empty beer bottles and a roll of bar towels I kept for cleaning spills. The bottles were clean, which was important. You had to take pride in your work, even when that work was preparing for your own finale. I grabbed 3 bottles and the bottle of Irish whiskey I'd been saving for my retirement. 30-year-old Redbreast, worth more than most people made in a month. I'd planned to drink it on my 70th birthday, maybe with a few old friends, toasting the years behind us and whatever time remained ahead. Plans change, but I didn't drink it. Instead, I poured the precious whiskey into the bottles, the amber liquid catching the candlelight like liquid fire. I tore strips from the bar towels and stuffed them into the necks, leaving enough hanging out to serve as fuses. Molotov cocktails. I'd seen them used during the riots in Detroit back in '67. Never thought I'd be making my own. The infected outside were getting more agitated. I could hear them pressing against the doors, testing the barriers. Soon they'd find a way in, they always did. But not yet. Not until I was ready. I carried the bottles back to the bar and set them next to the shotgun. Then I began my final preparations. I wiped down the bar one last time, arranged the glasses in neat rows, made sure everything was in its proper place. O'Malley's would go out looking like the respectable establishment it had always been. I poured 3 fingers of the last good whiskey I had into my best crystal tumbler, the one Margaret had given me for our anniversary. The whiskey was the color of burnished gold, perfect and pure. I raised it in a final toast. To Margaret, to O'Malley's, to everyone who found something worth staying for. The whiskey went down smooth, warming me from the inside out. I took another long draw from the cigar, feeling the smoke fill my lungs. This was living. Good tobacco, good whiskey, good memories. Time to open up. I picked up the shotgun. My grandfather's Remington, the one that had hung behind the bar since the day I'd bought the place. 1 shell left. I tucked one of the Molotov cocktails under my arm and walked to the front door, cigar clenched between my teeth. Through the glass, I could see them more clearly now. A crowd of maybe 30 or 40, pressed against the windows and door like desperate customers on Black Friday. Except these customers weren't after bargains. They were after me. I recognized some of the faces despite the decay. Mrs. Chen from the dry cleaners, her gentle smile replaced by a gaping maw lined with broken teeth. Dave Morrison, who used to coach Little League, his coaching jacket torn and stained with substances I didn't want to identify. Even Father Mackenzie from St. Mary's, his clerical collar still visible beneath the grime and blood. They'd all been good people once, neighbors, friends, pillars of the community. Now they were just hunger-wearing familiar faces. "You know," I said to the crowd gathering outside, "visiting hours are usually over by now. But I suppose we can make an exception." My hand was steady on the door handle, steadier than it had been in days. The whiskey helped, but it was more than that. This was right. This was how Chuck O'Malley was supposed to go out. Behind his own bar, surrounded by his regulars, with a glass of good Irish whiskey warming his belly, and Sinatra playing in the background. The jukebox was still cycling through our song, Sinatra's voice filling the empty space with promises of eternal love. Margaret would have appreciated that touch. She'd always said music made everything better, even the hard times. I thought about her final days in the hospital, how she'd made me promise to keep the bar running. "People need a place to belong, Chuck," she'd whispered, her voice already fading. "Promise me you'll keep giving them that." I'd kept that promise for 7 years. Now it was time for the final closing time. My grandfather's voice came back to me, something he'd said when he passed the shotgun down to me. "A man's got to choose his battles, Chuck, but when he finds the one worth fighting, he fights with everything he's got." This was my battle. This bar, these memories, this life I'd built one drink at a time. I wasn't going to run from it now. I slid back the bolt, turned the lock, put my hand on the door handle. "Last call," I said to the empty bar. "You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." I opened the door. The infected surged forward as one, a wave of hungry flesh and grasping hands. I touched the glowing tip of my cigar to the cloth fuse, watching it catch fire. The Molotov cocktail ignited in my hand like a promise kept.